Hey guys, tonight we begin with ancient Greek parties. And no, this is not going to be a calm evening of wise men sipping wine and politely nodding at each other. So before you get comfortable, take a moment like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are not going to a party. That would imply joy, spontaneity, and the possibility of leaving early without social consequences. You are going to a symposium, which is a very serious word ancient Greeks used to disguise the fact that a group of grown men planned to drink wine until their opinions became louder than their reasoning. The invitation was carefully worded. It didn't mention alcohol. It mentioned discussion, ideas, friendship, possibly virtue. This is how you know wine will be involved. Food, however, will not. You already ate somewhere else, because dinner is merely the warm-up. The symposium exists so everyone can focus on the real goal, seeing how many philosophical beliefs survive prolonged exposure to wine. You arrive at the house pretending you're here for intellectual stimulation. This is polite lying. No one calls you out on it because they are lying too. You are expected to participate. Quietly listening is suspicious. Silence suggests either arrogance or sobriety, and neither is welcome. A servant removes your shoes, which feels ceremonial until you realize it's mainly to prevent you from slipping later. The room is arranged with couches lining the walls. Chairs would imply posture. Posture implies self-control. Self-control ruins everything. You recline, attempting to look natural, which is difficult because the human body was not designed to lie sideways while debating morality. You glance around and notice everyone else pretending this is comfortable. You join them in this shared delusion. Your spine will file a formal complaint tomorrow. The lighting is low, not for romance, but so no one can clearly see each other's expressions once judgment begins to decline. The room hums with quiet anticipation, the sound of men about to become very confident about topics they only half understand. You tell yourself this will be civilized, thoughtful conversation, measured drinking, reasonable conclusions. You make these promises the way people promise they'll just have one cup. Then the wine arrives. It is mixed with water because the Greeks were many things, but suicidal was not one of them. You nod approvingly at the ratio, even though you will absolutely ignore it later. The symposium has officially begun. At this point, reason is still present. It won't stay long, because once everyone starts drinking, the symposium reveals its true purpose. Not to discover truth, but to test how confidently wrong a person can be while reclining. And you are about to participate enthusiastically. The moment you enter the room, you are expected to lie down. Not eventually. Not after a polite pause, immediately. Standing too long suggests uncertainty, and uncertainty is not fashionable at a symposium. Chairs are nowhere to be found. This is intentional. Chairs imply structure. Structure implies limits. Limits are the enemy of whatever tonight is about to become. You choose a couch and recline, trying to make it look natural. It is not natural. The human body was not designed to eat, drink, gesture, and argue about morality while leaning on one elbow like a fainting aristocrat. But everyone else is doing it, so you commit fully. Half reclining is worse than wrong. It's embarrassing. Your left arm goes numb almost immediately. You ignore it. Complaining would suggest weakness, and weakness invites philosophical attacks. You adjust your position slightly, which somehow makes it worse. At this point, you accept that circulation is optional and dignity is already gone. Reclining is not about comfort, it is about equality. When everyone is lying down, no one is towering over anyone else. Power is flattened. Authority becomes conversational. Also, it becomes much easier to spill wine without standing up to fix it. The couches are arranged along the walls, creating a ring of bodies facing inward. This ensures eye contact. Lots of it. You can't hide in the back. Every opinion you express will be witnessed, remembered, and possibly quoted back to you later. Incorrectly, but with confidence. Servants move quietly through the room, stepping over sandals and avoiding elbows. You admire their skill. They have done this many times. They already know which guests will become unbearable first. As you settle in, you notice the subtle competition. Who looks the most relaxed? Who reclines like this is their natural state? Who looks like they were born arguing sideways? You attempt to match their ease. You fail, but no one comments. They are too busy preparing their own performances. Lying down also slows drinking, in theory. In practice, it just makes refills easier because cups are already horizontal. You hold yours carefully, telling yourself you will sip slowly. This decision lasts approximately one conversation. At this stage, everyone is still relatively coherent. Voices are calm, laughter is measured, opinions are phrased politely. This is the illusion phase, the part of the evening everyone remembers fondly, even though it lasts about 10 minutes. You are now reclined, numb, and committed. The symposium has truly begun. The wine arrives sooner than you would like, and faster than you are prepared for. It is carried in with ceremony, poured from a large communal bowl, and treated with a seriousness usually reserved for religious objects. This should be your first warning. You are told, politely, confidently, that the wine has been mixed with water. This is meant to reassure you. It should not. Ancient Greek wine is not modern wine. It is thicker, darker, and strong enough that drinking it straight would turn the symposium into a public safety incident. Dilution is not moderation. It is survival. You take your first sip carefully. It tastes sharp, earthy, and slightly offended that you're being cautious. You nod appreciatively, as if you understand wine. Everyone else does the same. This is a room full of men pretending they know exactly what they're doing. The ratio, you quickly realize, is ambitious. Not reckless, yet, but confident. The host wants conversation to flow. He wants opinions. He wants arguments. He wants everyone just drunk enough to be honest, and just sober enough to articulate it badly. You tell yourself you will pace your drinking. This is a common thought at symposia, and almost always the last sensible one of the evening. You sip slowly, listening to the early conversations, light topics, safe ideas, gentle teasing. Everyone is still performing civilization. Then someone refills your cup. You did not ask for this. It simply happens. The cup is never empty long enough to be lonely. You consider declining the refill, but that would suggest either arrogance or weakness. So you accept it, graciously, while mentally recalculating how much control you actually have left. As the wine settles in, you feel warmer, looser, more articulate. You begin to believe your thoughts are clearer than usual. This is incorrect, but the confidence is convincing. You speak a little more. You gesture a little wider. Your voice gains weight, as if every sentence now deserves attention. Around the room, the same transformation is happening. Laughter becomes louder. Interruptions become more frequent. Agreements become enthusiastic. Disagreements become personal. The wine is doing exactly what it was meant to do. You glance at the communal bowl and realize it is already lower than it should be. Someone makes a joke about it. Someone else refills your cup again. You stop counting. At this point, the symposium crosses an invisible threshold. No one announces it. No one acknowledges it. But everyone feels it. The night is no longer being guided by reason. The wine has taken over, politely, efficiently, and with full consent, and you are absolutely sure this is going very well. At some point, someone decides the evening needs structure. This is adorable. In an effort to preserve balance, moderation, and the illusion of control, A symposiarch is appointed, the person responsible for regulating the wine, setting the pace, and preventing the symposium from turning into a philosophical crime scene. This person is chosen either because they are respected, intimidating, or sitting closest to the bowl. None of these qualities will matter. The symposiarch announces the rules. He speaks confidently, as if authority still functions in this room. He explains the wine-to-water ratio, the timing of refills, and the importance of not drinking too much too fast. Everyone nods. These nods mean nothing. They are ceremonial nods, like the kind you give before ignoring instructions entirely. For about 5 minutes, the system works. Cups are filled carefully. Refills are spaced out. People pretend restraint is a shared value. You even believe this might succeed. Then someone laughs too hard. Then someone else refills their cup without asking. Then the symposiarch refills his own cup, which is not a great look for leadership. You watch his authority quietly dissolve as guests begin topping off their wine whenever a servant walks by. No one challenges him directly. That would be rude. Instead, everyone simply behaves as if the rules are suggestions, the way people treat speed limits on empty roads. The symposiarch attempts to reassert control. He clears his throat. He makes a comment about moderation. Someone responds with a joke. The room laughs. The moment is gone. From now on, the symposium will run on momentum. You notice that cups are no longer being emptied before refilling. This is an important development. Wine is now stacking. Conversations overlap. The room grows louder. The symposiarch gives up and reclines deeper into his couch, accepting his fate. This is not failure. This is tradition. The position of symposiarch exists not to maintain order, but to give the evening a brief head start before chaos. It provides structure the way a thin rope provides structure to a landslide. You stop paying attention to who is in charge. No one is. The wine decides now. And strangely, this feels correct. The symposium is no longer pretending to be governed. It has reached its natural state. A room full of confident voices, loosened minds, and cups that are never empty long enough to cool. Responsibility had its moment. It passed quietly, without protest. Once responsibility has officially left the room, entertainment arrives. This is meant to elevate the evening. It does not. It does, however, make it louder. Someone produces a liar. This person believes they are talented. No one challenges this belief, because the wine has reached the point where disagreement feels like unnecessary effort. The first notes are plucked, and you nod appreciatively, even though you cannot tell whether the instrument is being tuned or slowly threatened. Music at a symposium is not background noise. It demands attention. You're expected to listen, react, and look emotionally moved. So you do. You tilt your head slightly. You close your eyes for a moment. You make a thoughtful face that says, "Yes, this is culture," even though what you are actually thinking is, "This sounds better from further away." Then comes singing. Someone begins reciting poetry. Another joins in. The rhythm is questionable. The volume is ambitious. The confidence is unmatched. You clap politely at the end, because that is what civilized people do when they are unsure whether something has gone wrong. The musician, encouraged by the applause, continues. At this point, you realize the purpose of the music is not enjoyment. It is participation. It fills the room, prevents silence, and gives everyone something to agree on without thinking too hard. You tell yourself it's better than more debating. This may not be true, but it feels comforting. As the wine works its way deeper into the room, the music grows bolder. Someone starts tapping along. Someone else hums incorrectly. A third person insists on correcting the melody and makes it worse. The lyre player accepts these contributions with grace, which is impressive considering the circumstances. You begin to sway slightly, not because you are enjoying the music, but because lying down and drinking wine has affected your sense of balance. You assure yourself this looks natural. Servants move through the chaos with practiced indifference. They have seen this before. They know how this ends. They refill cups while stepping around enthusiastic gestures and dangerously expressive elbows. By now, the music is no longer entertainment. It is atmosphere. It blends into the laughter, the conversation, the wine splashing just a little too close to the floor. You continue to nod, clap, and pretend this is exactly how you hoped the evening would go. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize something important. This is only the beginning. Once music has softened everyone's judgment and wine has convinced you that your reflexes are excellent, someone suggests games. This is the turning point. This is where the evening stops pretending to be about culture and becomes about proving things that do not need proving. The games are simple. That's what makes them dangerous. One involves flicking wine from your cup at a target, usually a small dish or bowl placed across the room. The rules are explained quickly and poorly. Accuracy is praised. Spillage is ignored. You participate because opting out would imply cowardice, or worse, sobriety. You flick. You miss. Wine splashes onto the floor. No one cares. In fact, someone cheers. You are encouraged by this response and flick again with more confidence and less control. The target is now theoretical. Another game involves riddles. Someone poses a clever question, expecting clever answers. This works for approximately 1 round. After that, the riddles become increasingly abstract, then aggressively confusing, and finally indistinguishable from statements. You offer an answer anyway. Everyone nods like it makes sense. The point is not winning. The point is participation. The point is noise. As the games continue, the room becomes more animated. Reclining turns into half-sitting. Half-sitting turns into leaning dangerously forward. Gestures widen, cups tilt. A couch leg becomes suspiciously wet. You notice that people are laughing before the jokes land. Sometimes there is no joke at all. Laughter arrives anyway, as if summoned. At some point, a competitive spirit emerges. Someone insists on keeping score. This is abandoned almost immediately when no one agrees on the rules or the numbers. Another person claims victory anyway. No one disputes it. Wine is now everywhere. On hands, on clothing, on the floor, on ideas. Servants stop trying to clean and switch to damage control. They have accepted that the symposium has entered its active phase. You feel unusually confident in your abilities. You are convinced your aim has improved. It has not. You flick wine with dramatic flair and knock something over. It makes a sound that suggests it was important. There is a brief pause, then laughter. Encouraging laughter. This is how the games work. They remove restraint, amplify bravado, and gently push everyone toward the edge of decorum, and then over it. You are having fun. You are also absolutely making a fool of yourself. Both things are true. Just when you think the evening has reached its peak of harmless chaos, philosophy arrives. Not politely, not on schedule. It simply barges in, sets itself down between 2 spilled cups, and demands to be taken seriously. Someone clears their throat and announces a topic. It doesn't matter which one. Virtue, justice, love, the good life, the nature of truth. You recognize the words immediately and feel a surge of confidence because you have heard these words before. This convinces you that you are qualified to speak. You begin carefully, forming a thoughtful sentence. It starts well. It ends somewhere else entirely. No one notices. They are too busy preparing their own contributions, which they believe will be more profound. Within moments, the room is full of opinions. Not arguments, opinions. Loud ones. Everyone speaks as if they are discovering ancient wisdom in real time, even though half of it was heard second-hand last week, and the other half was invented during the last refill. You interrupt someone. They interrupt you back. This is not considered rude. It is considered engagement. Gestures become theatrical. You point, you wave, you recline more aggressively. At one point, you knock your cup slightly and hold it steady just in time. This feels like a victory worth mentioning. You do mention it. No one listens. Someone insists that virtue can be taught. Someone else insists it cannot. A third person insists that both positions are wrong, but does not explain why. You nod enthusiastically, because this feels correct. The wine has reached the stage where every idea feels urgent. Silence becomes uncomfortable. You speak not because you have something to say, but because not speaking feels like losing. Across the room, someone laughs loudly at their own point. Another person claps in agreement with a statement they did not fully hear. This is how consensus forms. The debate grows warmer, louder, and increasingly personal. You feel passionate. About what exactly is unclear, but the feeling is undeniable, and then it happens. You say something you immediately believe is brilliant. It sounds right. It feels important. It lands with confidence. For a brief moment, the room quiets. Someone nods. Someone else repeats part of what you said, but slightly wrong. You bask in this moment. Tomorrow, you will not remember what you said. Tonight, you are absolutely certain it changed everything. Philosophy has taken control of the symposium, and it is drunk. At some point, without any formal announcement, you begin speaking louder. You don't decide to do this. It simply happens, the way tides happen, or the way bad ideas gain confidence after wine. In your mind, you are not shouting. You are projecting. There is a difference, and you are convinced everyone appreciates it. Your voice now carries across the room. This feels important. You lean forward on the couch, gesturing broadly, as if volume alone can shepherd your thoughts into coherence. It cannot, but the effort is impressive. You notice that when you speak loudly, people look at you. This reinforces the behavior. Eye contact becomes validation. You take pauses for effect. The pauses are too long. Someone fills them. You raise your voice slightly to regain control. This works, but only briefly. Your arguments have simplified. Nuance has quietly left the room and taken logic with it. You no longer explain why you believe something. You simply state it firmly, as if firmness is evidence. This is incredibly satisfying. Around you, everyone else has reached the same stage. Conversations overlap. No one is listening fully. People respond to fragments of sentences, nodding vigorously at points that were never made. Agreement and disagreement blur into a single loud activity. You laugh louder too. You are not entirely sure what you're laughing at, but the timing feels right. Someone else laughs with you. This creates a moment of shared joy that you assume will be remembered fondly. It will not. Your gestures become ambitious. You knock something over again. This time, you notice. You apologize with enthusiasm and continue speaking without waiting for a response. This is considered acceptable. You are convinced that your thoughts are clearer than they have ever been. You feel articulate, expressive, unstoppable. In reality, you are repeating yourself with increasing confidence and decreasing precision. This does not concern you. At one point you hear yourself talking and think, yes, this is exactly how a serious thinker sounds. This thought brings you great comfort. The room is now fully alive, loud, warm, and vibrating with overlapping opinions. Wine cups are constantly refilled. Servants have stopped intervening. You are no longer participating in the symposium. You are the symposium. And somewhere, deep inside, a quieter version of you is taking notes for tomorrow, though it will be ignored completely. That's when you notice him. There is always one man at the symposium who should not exist. While everyone else has gradually loosened, softened, and emotionally leaned into the wine, this man remains sharp, upright, annoyingly present. He drinks. A lot. And yet somehow nothing happens to him. You do not like this man. He reclines calmly, listening more than speaking, eyes clear, posture steady. He remembers names. He follows arguments. He reacts at appropriate moments. This is deeply unsettling. You glance at his cup, hoping to see that it's been secretly filled with water. It has not. Every time you make a bold claim, this man tilts his head slightly. Not aggressively, not dismissively, thoughtfully. This is worse. You can't tell if he agrees, disagrees, or is simply cataloguing your mistakes for later use. Someone asks him a question. He answers concisely, clearly, with terrifying coherence. The room quiets for a moment, as if recognizing a predator. You feel the sudden urge to interrupt, not because you disagree, but because silence feels dangerous. You speak, louder than intended. He looks at you again. This man will remember tonight. While others are repeating themselves, exaggerating stories, and slowly unraveling, he continues engaging with fresh points. You begin to suspect he is not drinking wine the way everyone else is drinking wine. He is drinking it like a tool. This feels unfair. You reassure yourself that no one will remember what you said earlier, that everything spoken here will dissolve by morning into vague impressions and wine-soaked regret. This belief collapses every time he nods, smiles faintly, or responds directly to something you said 10 minutes ago. Accurately. You avoid his gaze. You reposition yourself on the couch, pretending your arm has gone numb again. You laugh loudly at a nearby joke, hoping distraction will save you. It does not. At some point, someone praises this man for his endurance. He shrugs. Modestly. You resent him for this too. The symposium continues around him like a storm, but he remains untouched, a calm centre of memory and clarity. You realise, with a sinking feeling, that tomorrow, when you struggle to recall the evening, this man will recall it for you. In detail, you decide to drink more. This seems like the correct response, because if one person is going to remember everything you said tonight, the least you can do is make sure you don't. At some point in the evening, usually between a particularly confident argument and a poorly aimed gesture, you notice something important by its absence. Respectable women are not here. This is not an oversight. This is policy. The symposium is a male space, designed very carefully to be exactly that. Wives, daughters, and women of good standing remain elsewhere, protected from this spectacle, or perhaps protected from you. The Greeks call this order. You call it convenient because no one you actually have to face tomorrow is present to hear what you are saying tonight. The women who are present fall into very specific categories: musicians, entertainers, courtesans. They are educated, articulate, and far more sober than anyone on the couches. This is not an accident. Someone has to remember how the night actually went. They move through the room with practiced calm, playing instruments, singing, refilling cups, observing. They laugh at the right moments. They listen closely. They make mental notes you will never have access to. You briefly convince yourself that this makes the symposium more philosophical. Fewer distractions, you think. Just men and ideas. This is incorrect. The real effect is that the room becomes louder, bolder, and significantly more confident in opinions that have not been stress-tested by reality. Someone makes a dramatic statement about love. You nod along enthusiastically, forgetting that no one present is allowed to challenge this perspective from experience. Another man declares something about women's nature. You agree reflexively, because agreement is easier than thought at this point. The entertainers remain neutral. They have heard all of this before, last week and the week before that, possibly from the same men. You attempt to impress one of them with an observation you are certain is clever. She smiles politely. This should concern you. It does not. The absence of respectable women creates a strange freedom. No restraint, no witnesses that matter. Opinions grow unchecked. Confidence inflates. The symposium becomes a sealed environment where ideas bounce around without resistance, growing louder and less accurate with every pass. You feel emboldened, safer, less accountable. This, you later realize, is exactly the problem, because a room where only one kind of voice is allowed does not become wiser. It becomes louder, and tonight, volume is winning. By now, the room has changed. You can feel it. The air is thicker, heavier, layered with smoke, wine, sweat, and confidence. Lamps flicker. Shadows stretch along the walls. What once felt intimate now feels crowded, even though no one new has entered. This is what happens when too many opinions occupy too little space. You are warm. Too warm. The kind of warm that makes you forget when you last felt comfortable. You shift on the couch, trying to cool down without standing up, because standing up would involve consequences. You loosen your clothing slightly and immediately feel like this was the right decision. It was not. Voices overlap constantly now. Conversations no longer take turns. They collide. Someone laughs loudly from across the room, not because something was funny, but because laughter has become a reflex. You join in without knowing why. This feels natural. Emotions begin leaking into the discussions. What started as abstract ideas now sounds suspiciously personal. A debate about justice turns into a complaint about unfair treatment. A discussion about virtue becomes an accusation. Someone mentions honour. Someone else takes it personally. You are not sure why, but you nod. You find yourself reacting faster than you think. Words leave your mouth before they are fully formed. You interrupt someone mid-sentence, then immediately forget what you were going to say. You fill the silence with volume. This seems effective. The heat makes everything feel urgent. Every statement sounds like it matters deeply. You are convinced that if you don't speak now, your thought will disappear forever. This is incorrect, but you speak anyway. Several people speak at once. No one wins. Someone slams a cup down for emphasis. Wine spills. No one cleans it up. That would slow things down. Another person leans forward dramatically, knocking knees with a neighbour. Apologies are exchanged loudly and immediately forgotten. You notice faces are redder now. Eyes are brighter. Movements are sharper. The symposium has reached emotional operating temperature. This is where things are said that will echo quietly later, usually at inconvenient times. You feel alive, engaged, fully present. You also feel a faint sense of danger, like standing too close to a fire you built yourself. The room is no longer just hosting the symposium. The room is the symposium, pulsing, loud, emotional, and one careless sentence away from becoming unforgettable. At some point, the argument you were passionately defending simply disappears. It doesn't end. It doesn't resolve. It just quietly slips out of your grasp, like a thought you were absolutely sure you had 5 seconds ago. This should alarm you. It does not. What remains is confidence. Pure, undiluted confidence. You no longer remember what started the debate, but you are certain you were correct. You feel this deeply, in your bones, in your gestures, in the way you nod while someone else speaks, as if confirming points that may or may not align with what you were previously saying. Someone challenges you. You respond immediately, without hesitation. The response is firm, decisive, and completely unrelated to the challenge. No one points this out. That would slow the momentum. Momentum is sacred now. You begin repeating yourself. This feels intentional, like emphasis. You believe repetition adds strength. It does not, but the conviction behind it is impressive. Each time you restate your point, you do so louder, as if volume might summon clarity back into existence. Around the room, the same phenomenon is unfolding. Everyone has lost the thread, but no one has lost certainty. Statements float freely, detached from evidence, context, or even grammar. They collide occasionally, and are immediately applauded. You hear yourself say something and think, yes, exactly. That's what I meant. Even though you have no idea what you meant, someone agrees with you enthusiastically. This feels validating. You do not question why they agree or what they think you said. Agreement is enough. You are no longer debating ideas. You are defending a feeling. The feeling that you are right and that this matters. Silence feels threatening. You fill it quickly. Others do the same. The room hums with overlapping declarations, none of which require follow-up. You lean back, satisfied. Your work here is done. You have contributed meaningfully to the evening's intellectual atmosphere. You know this because you feel very sure about it. Somewhere nearby, someone is still sober enough to notice the disconnect. You do not look at them. The symposium has reached a crucial stage, the point where clarity is gone, memory is unreliable, but confidence has achieved total independence. This is dangerous territory, but it feels incredible. Eventually, the symposium does not end. It simply loses momentum and collapses inward like a tired argument that can no longer support itself. No one announces that it's time to leave. People just begin failing to continue. You attempt to sit up fully. This was a mistake. Your body responds with a brief but firm reminder that reclining sideways for hours while drinking was not part of its design specifications. You pause, pretending this hesitation was intentional. No one questions it. Several people are doing the same thing. Around the room, conversations trail off mid-sentence. Someone begins a thought, forgets it halfway through, and replaces it with laughter. Another person stands up too fast, immediately regrets it, and pretends they were just stretching philosophically. A servant appears with a lamp. This is the universal signal. The night has entered its final phase, assisted departure. The servant does not ask if you need help. They already know. You rise carefully, one limb at a time, negotiating with gravity as if it might be open to compromise. The floor feels farther away than expected. The couch, which betrayed you earlier, now tries to pull you back in. You refuse. Shoes are returned to you. You stare at them briefly, as if unsure what their purpose is. Eventually, you put them on. Not correctly, but adequately. Outside, the night air hits you with brutal honesty. It is colder, sharper, and far less impressed by your confidence. You inhale deeply and immediately regret it. The wine does not appreciate fresh air. Someone places a steadying hand on your arm. You accept this without comment. Independence is no longer a priority. As you walk, the street seems longer than it was on the way in. The lamplight sways. Shadows stretch. You feel both deeply thoughtful and profoundly empty. This feels philosophical, so you decide not to question it. You attempt to recall the evening. You remember fragments, laughter, strong opinions, the sober man's face, something you said that felt important. The details are gone, but the certainty remains that you were brilliant. Your escort listens patiently as you summarize your own thoughts to yourself out loud. They do not respond. This is kindness. When you finally reach your door, you pause. You feel like something meaningful has happened, something lasting, something worth remembering. You will not remember it. Tomorrow, you will wake with a headache, a dry mouth, and the vague suspicion that you owe someone an apology, though you will not be sure who. Tonight, however, you are convinced the symposium was a success. You survived it, and that, in ancient Greece, counted as participation. Morning arrives with absolutely no regard for what you did the night before. There is no gentle transition, no respectful pause. You wake up as if summoned by an angry god who has reviewed your behaviour and found it disappointing. Your head hurts in a way that feels philosophical. Your mouth is dry, your eyes resist opening, and your body refuses to cooperate without negotiation. You lie still for a moment, hoping this is temporary. It is not. As memory returns, it does so selectively and cruelly. You remember confidence. You remember volume. You remember being absolutely certain you were correct. You do not remember why. Fragments surface. A gesture. A laugh that went on too long. A sentence that began with conviction and ended somewhere unsafe. You replay moments, hoping clarity will arrive, and instead discovering only new layers of regret. You sit up slowly. This feels like a mistake, but you continue anyway. The room tilts slightly, as if offering commentary. You take this as criticism. Now comes the real danger, running into people. Every passerby feels like a potential witness. Did they hear you last night? Did they hear about you last night? You scan faces for recognition, judgment, or worse, amusement. Someone greets you warmly. This does not reassure you. Warmth suggests memory. You attempt to reconstruct the symposium logically. There was wine. There was debate. There was laughter. At some point, you were winning an argument. You are sure of this. The lack of evidence does not trouble you. It simply annoys you. Then you remember him, the sober man, the one who listened, the one who nodded, the one who will remember everything you said, accurately and without mercy. You feel a chill unrelated to the morning air. You consider avoiding him indefinitely. Throughout the day, ordinary tasks feel heavier. Conversations feel louder. Every sound feels personal. You promise yourself you will never drink that much again. This promise feels sincere and will last until the next invitation. By evening, the worst of the discomfort fades, leaving behind a familiar sense of resignation. Whatever you said, it's too late now. The symposium has passed into memory. Yours, fractured and forgiving. Others, precise and permanent. You tell yourself this is part of the process. This is how ideas are tested. This is how men learn. Mostly, this is how men learn to pace their drinking. You survive the morning, you survive the day, and by nightfall, you almost believe you'd do it all again, with a little distance and a lot of water. You begin to understand what last night really was. It was not chaos. It was not refinement either. It was something in between. A strange human machine that turned wine, voices, ego, and time into ideas that occasionally mattered. Ancient Greek parties did not produce philosophy because everyone behaved well. They produced philosophy because people didn't. Ideas were not born in silence or calm contemplation. They emerged from argument, contradiction, exaggeration, and the sheer refusal to stop talking even when logic had clearly left the building. You did not attend the symposium to find truth. You attended to test it, loudly, imperfectly, and in front of witnesses. You threw thoughts into the room the way others threw wine, carelessly, enthusiastically, and with very little concern for clean-up. Most of what was said last night will never matter. It will dissolve into jokes, retellings, and second-hand embarrassment. But a few fragments, a question, a challenge, a contradiction, will linger. Someone will remember them. Someone will revisit them sober. Someone will write them down later, minus the slurring and confidence. This is the part history prefers not to mention. The great ideas of ancient Greece did not emerge fully formed from serene minds. They were hammered out in rooms like this, smoky, loud, uncomfortable rooms where men reclined awkwardly, drank too much, interrupted each other, and mistook confidence for insight until insight occasionally appeared by accident. You were not attending a party. You were participating in a social engine. The symposium was a place where hierarchy softened, restraint loosened, and voices collided without a clear winner. It allowed people to say the wrong thing loudly enough for someone else to correct it later. That correction, not the original speech, is what survived. From nights like this came philosophy, politics, theatre, and art. Not because the environment was ideal, but because it was human. Messy, emotional, flawed, repetitive, loud. So when you imagine ancient Greek parties, do not picture calm men in white robes nodding thoughtfully. Picture a room full of confidence, spilled wine, half-finished thoughts, and one man who remembers everything. Picture ideas being born not from order, but from friction. You were not there to behave. You were there to contribute, even badly. And somehow, against all odds, it worked. That is what ancient Greek parties were actually like. Before cooking became culture, it was survival. Long before kitchens had walls or names, they existed as rings of stones surrounding a fire that never truly slept. In the ancient world, flame was the first tool, the first technology, and the first line between life and death. Cooking did not begin with taste, it began with necessity. Early humans quickly learned that raw food was risky. Meat spoiled fast, roots were hard to digest, and parasites were an invisible threat. Fire changed all of that. Heat softened tough fibers, killed disease, and released energy trapped inside plants and flesh. A roasted animal was not just safer to eat, it fed more people for longer. In this sense, cooking was humanity's earliest form of efficiency. These first meals were simple but deliberate. Meat was skewered on sharpened sticks or laid directly on hot stones. Tubers were buried in ash to cook slowly underground. Nothing was wasted. Bones were cracked for marrow. Fat dripped into the fire and flavoured everything around it. Smoke clung to hair, skin, and clothing, becoming the scent of daily life. There were no recipes, but there was knowledge. Elders knew which plants became edible after heating, and which remained deadly no matter what you did to them. Fire made bitter roots tolerable, and transformed poisonous seeds into staples. Cooking was learned by watching, copying, and remembering, not by writing. Over time, fire itself became organised. Hearths were built in fixed places. Ash was cleared, stones arranged, airflow managed. This was not accidental. A good hearth meant consistent heat, which meant predictable food. Predictable food meant stability. Stability meant settlements. In this way, cooking helped anchor humans to place long before agriculture fully took over. Flavour came later. At first, there was only heat, smoke, and time. But even then, preferences formed. Some foods tasted better roasted than boiled. Some meats were sweeter when cooked slowly. These small observations were the ancestors of cuisine. The birth of cooking was not glamorous. It was smoky, messy, and dangerous. Burns were common. Fires spread. But every cooked meal quietly rewired the human body and brain, allowing more energy, larger communities, and longer lives. Before cooking was art, before it was tradition, before it was pleasure, it was fire, patience, and hunger working together. As fire became controlled, cooking became contained. In ancient Mesopotamia, one of the world's earliest urban civilizations, this shift took a decisive form: clay. The invention of pottery changed ancient kitchens forever. Food was no longer just roasted or scorched. It could now be simmered, mixed, and transformed slowly over time. Mesopotamian kitchens revolved around clay pots set directly into hearths. These vessels allowed for boiling and stewing, methods perfectly suited to a land shaped by rivers, grain, and livestock. Barley, wheat, onions, garlic, and lentils formed the backbone of daily meals. Meat was a luxury, stretched thin by cooking it in broths that could feed many mouths at once. What makes Mesopotamian cooking extraordinary is that it was written down. On clay tablets pressed with cuneiform script, scribes recorded some of the oldest known recipes in human history. These were not poetic descriptions, but practical instructions: quantities, steps, and ingredients. Cooking had officially entered the realm of knowledge worth preserving. The stews themselves were complex. They combined meat with leeks, herbs, fermented sauces, and fats. Some recipes included milk, beer, or blood as thickeners. Flavour came from balance rather than spice heat. Salty, sour, and earthy notes layered together in ways that feel surprisingly modern. These meals were not cooked in isolation. Kitchens were social spaces, especially in larger households and temples. Women, servants, and enslaved workers prepared food in large quantities, feeding families, labourers, and gods alike. Offerings to deities were cooked with the same care as meals for humans, reinforcing the idea that food connected the divine and the everyday. Technology quietly supported all of this. Ovens made from clay and brick allowed for bread baking, while covered pots controlled evaporation and heat. Lids mattered, timing mattered, experience mattered. A good cook was valued not just for taste, but for consistency. Mesopotamian cooking shows us something crucial. Once food could be contained, it could be planned. Meals could be richer, more filling, and more reliable. Cooking was no longer just about surviving the day. It was about sustaining a society. From smoky fires to bubbling stews, the ancient kitchen had taken its first true shape. In ancient Egypt, cooking followed the river. The Nile did not just flood fields and feed crops. It set the rhythm of daily meals. When the waters rose and fell, they dictated what could be grown, stored, and eaten. Egyptian cooking was deeply practical, built around abundance when nature allowed and restraint when it did not. Bread was the foundation of nearly every meal. Made primarily from emmer wheat and barley, it came in countless forms: flat, thick, sweetened with dates, or shaped into loaves for offerings. Grinding grain was hard labour, often done daily with stone querns. Sand inevitably worked its way into the flour, slowly wearing down teeth over a lifetime. Eating bread was nourishing, but it was not gentle. Beer was just as essential. Thick, cloudy, and low in alcohol, it was safer than water, and consumed by adults and children alike. Beer was brewed from partially baked bread that was crumbled, soaked, and fermented. It provided calories, nutrients, and comfort, making it a liquid meal rather than a drink in the modern sense. Egyptian kitchens were simple but organised. Hearths were built from mud brick, and clay ovens baked bread by trapping heat inside domed structures. Cooking pots were round-bottomed and designed to sit in ash or be propped up by stones. There was no rush. Most dishes simmered slowly, fueled by patience rather than flame. Vegetables filled the gaps that meat could not. Onions, leeks, garlic, lettuce, and legumes were common, eaten fresh or cooked into stews. Fish from the Nile was widely consumed, dried or salted for preservation. Meat, beef, goat, or poultry was reserved for festivals, temples, and the wealthy. For most people, it was an occasional treat rather than a daily expectation. Spices existed, but subtly. Coriander, cumin, and herbs were used sparingly, enhancing rather than dominating food. Honey was the primary sweetener, added to breads and cakes for special occasions. Cooking aimed for nourishment, balance, and familiarity, not excess. Food was also deeply symbolic. Offerings placed in tombs and temples mirrored real meals, because eating was believed to continue after death. To cook well was not just to live well, it was to prepare for eternity. In Egypt, cooking was steady, repetitive, and reliable. It fed a civilization that valued order, continuity, and harmony with nature, one loaf and one cup of beer at a time. In ancient Greece, cooking stepped out of the dark interior and into the open air. Greek homes were built around courtyards, and so were their kitchens. Smoke escaped upward, light poured in from above, and meals were shaped as much by climate as by culture. Cooking here was simpler than in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but no less intentional. At the centre of Greek cooking was olive oil. It was fat, fuel, flavour, and preservation all at once. Olive oil replaced animal fat in most dishes, used for frying, drizzling, and storing food. Bread dipped in oil was a meal. Vegetables cooked in oil were considered complete. Even fish was often grilled and finished with nothing more than oil and herbs. Greek kitchens relied on portable clay braziers rather than fixed hearths. These small charcoal stoves could be moved depending on weather or occasion. Pots were placed directly on top, allowing for boiling and stewing, while skewers were used for roasting meat. This flexibility suited a society that valued outdoor living and communal meals. Grains remained essential, but bread in Greece was rough and dense, often mixed with barley. Wheat bread existed, but it was expensive and associated with status. For most people, porridge and flatbreads were everyday fare. Meals were filling, not indulgent. Vegetables were abundant and central. Cabbage, onions, lentils, chickpeas, and greens appeared constantly, cooked simply or eaten raw. Fish, especially for coastal communities, was more common than meat. Meat itself was tied closely to sacrifice. Animals were slaughtered during religious festivals, and cooking became a public, ritualized act. The gods received the smoke and fat. People ate the rest. Flavour in Greek cooking came from restraint. Herbs like oregano, thyme, and mint added aroma without overpowering the food. Garlic was common, wine was used in cooking, and vinegar sharpened sauces. Spices from distant lands existed. but they were rare and costly, used sparingly if at all. Meals were social but structured. Men often ate together at symposia, reclining while servants brought food. Women cooked, but rarely participated in these gatherings. Cooking, therefore, reflected social boundaries as much as taste. Greek cuisine was about balance, between simplicity and nourishment, ritual and routine. The kitchen did not aim to impress. It aimed to sustain body, mind, and civic life, one olive-oiled dish at a time. In ancient Rome, cooking split into two very different worlds. There was the kitchen of the wealthy, filled with tools, servants, and imported ingredients. And then there was the street, where most Romans actually ate. The majority of the population lived in cramped apartment blocks with little or no space to cook. Open flames were dangerous, and kitchens were rare. As a result, Roman cities became some of the first true street food cultures in history. Thermopolia lined the streets. Small food shops with counters embedded with clay jars holding hot dishes. Stews, beans, lentils, bread, sausages, and fried foods were served quickly to workers, travellers, and the urban poor. You ate standing up, often with your hands, surrounded by noise, smoke, and shouting vendors. Convenience mattered more than comfort. For those who could cook at home, Roman kitchens were functional but smoky. Hearths burned wood or charcoal, and bronze or iron cookware handled intense heat. Romans roasted, boiled, fried, and baked with confidence. Bread ovens existed both privately and publicly, producing loaves on an industrial scale for cities of hundreds of thousands. The defining feature of Roman cooking was sauce, especially garum. Made from fermented fish guts left to rot in the sun, garum was intensely salty, pungent, and unavoidable. It was added to nearly everything, from meat to vegetables to wine. To Roman tastes, it was not disgusting. It was essential. Roman cuisine was also global. The empire pulled ingredients from across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Pepper came from India, dates from the desert, wine from Gaul and Spain. Wealthy households competed through extravagance, serving exotic animals, stuffed dormice, and elaborate multi-course meals designed to impress guests as much as feed them. Cooking in elite Roman homes was a performance. Professional cooks oversaw teams of slaves, timing dishes precisely to match conversation and spectacle. Recipes recorded by writers like Apicius focused on excess, complexity, and novelty, food as status. Yet beneath the luxury, the average Roman meal remained humble. Bread, olives, beans, and watered wine. Meat was occasional. Hunger was common. Cooking reflected the inequalities of empire. In Rome, food was everywhere, in kitchens, on streets, in temples, and at banquets. Cooking had become not just survival or tradition, but identity, power, and display. In the world of the Aztec Empire, cooking began not with fire alone, but with stone. The foundation of daily food was maize, and maize could not be eaten raw. It had to be transformed through nixtamalization, soaking dried corn in an alkaline solution made from lime or ash. This process softened the kernels, released nutrients, and turned maize into something that could sustain an empire. This was not accidental chemistry. It was inherited knowledge, refined over centuries. Without nixtamalization, corn causes malnutrition. With it, maize becomes complete. Every Aztec kitchen depended on this quiet but brilliant technique. Once prepared, the corn was ground by hand on a metate, a flat stone used with a heavy grinding tool. This was exhausting, daily labour, usually done by women before dawn. The result was masa, a soft dough that became tortillas, tamales, and countless other foods. Cooking began early because hunger waited for no one. Aztec hearths were simple, usually 3 stones supporting a clay comal, a flat griddle heated over fire. Tortillas were cooked quickly, flipped by hand, eaten fresh. They were not side dishes. They were plates, spoons, and staples all at once. Everything was wrapped in them. Beans, squash, chilies, tomatoes, and herbs filled out meals. Meat was rare. Turkey, dog, fish, or insects appeared occasionally, but most people ate plant-based diets by necessity, not ideology. Chilies provided heat, flavour and preservation. Meals were spicy, smoky and deeply aromatic. One of the most important drinks was chocolate. Made from cacao beans, ground and mixed with water, chili and spices, it was bitter, foamy and cold. Chocolate was not a dessert. It was ritual, currency and status. Only elites drank it freely. For everyone else, it was sacred and rare. Cooking in the Aztec world was inseparable from religion. Fire was alive. Food offerings fed gods. Meals followed calendars, rituals, and cosmic cycles. Even everyday cooking carried spiritual weight. Technology was subtle but effective. No metal cookware existed, yet the system worked. Stone, clay, fire, and timing replaced iron and steel. Efficiency came from tradition, not tools. Aztec cooking was labor-intensive, repetitive, and essential. Every tortilla was the result of hours of preparation. Every meal reminded people that survival depended on knowledge passed hand to hand, generation to generation. Here, cooking was not luxury or display. It was discipline and devotion made edible. In ancient China, cooking evolved toward efficiency, balance, and control. Unlike cultures that relied heavily on roasting and open flames, Chinese kitchens favoured methods that conserved fuel and maximised nutrition. This was not philosophical at first. It was practical. Wood was valuable, populations were dense, and cooking had to be fast, repeatable, and reliable. The hearth was compact, often built low to the ground, with openings designed to channel heat precisely. From this came one of the most influential cooking tools in history, the wok. Thin metal walls heated quickly, allowing food to cook in seconds rather than minutes. Stir-frying was not about speed for convenience. It was about survival in a resource-conscious world. Cutting mattered as much as cooking. Ingredients were sliced small and uniformly before touching heat. This reduced cooking time and made food easier to eat with chopsticks. Knives were used in preparation, not at the table. Cooking ended violence. Eating required harmony. Grains formed the base of the diet. In the north, millet and wheat dominated. In the south, rice ruled daily life. Rice was steamed rather than baked, cooked in lidded pots that trapped heat and moisture. Steaming preserved texture and nutrients while using less fuel than boiling. Vegetables were constant: cabbage, greens, mushrooms, bamboo shoots and roots. Soybeans were transformed into tofu, sauces, and pastes through fermentation. Another quiet technological triumph. Fermented foods added protein, flavour and shelf life without the need for refrigeration. Meat existed, but in moderation. Pork and poultry were common when available, but always stretched with vegetables and grains. Bone broths extracted every possible nutrient. Nothing was wasted. Cooking reflected the belief that balance, not abundance, sustained health. Seasoning followed similar logic. Soy sauce, vinegar, ginger, garlic, and scallions layered flavour without overwhelming the dish. Spices were used deliberately, not excessively. The goal was harmony between salty, sour, bitter, sweet, and savoury, an idea that would later be formalised, but was already practised instinctively. Chinese cooking was also deeply tied to medicine. Food was categorised by its effect on the body: warming, cooling, drying, or moistening. What you cooked depended on the season, your health, and your age. The kitchen was an extension of preventative care. In ancient China, cooking was not spectacle. It was mastery through restraint. Heat was brief, cuts were precise, and meals were designed to sustain the body and maintain balance, quietly, efficiently, and every single day. In ancient India, cooking was shaped by climate, belief, and an early mastery of flavour. Unlike many ancient cuisines that relied on subtle seasoning, Indian cooking embraced complexity early on. Heat, aroma, and spice were not afterthoughts. They were the foundation of the kitchen. Grains formed the base of daily meals. Wheat dominated the north, shaped into flatbreads cooked on hot griddles. Rice ruled the south, boiled or steamed to accompany stews and vegetables. These staples were filling but intentionally plain, designed to carry stronger flavors layered on top. What truly distinguished Indian cooking was its use of spices. Turmeric, cumin, coriander, mustard seed, ginger, and black pepper were not used randomly. They were toasted, ground, and combined with purpose. Spices preserved food in hot climates, aided digestion, and added depth without relying on meat. Cooking here was chemistry guided by experience. Fire was controlled but constant. Clay hearths burned wood or dried dung, producing steady heat ideal for slow cooking. Pots were thick-walled, designed to simmer lentils, vegetables and grains into nourishing stews. These dishes could cook unattended, freeing time for work and ritual. Meat consumption varied widely. In many regions, it was limited or avoided altogether due to religious beliefs. The cow, especially, became sacred, shaping diets around dairy rather than slaughter. Milk was transformed into yogurt, butter, and clarified ghee, which became one of the most important cooking fats. Ghee added richness, stability, and flavour, and it burned cleanly in hot pans. Vegetarian cooking thrived not as restriction, but as innovation. Lentils and legumes provided protein. Vegetables were cooked in countless ways: fried, stewed, spiced, or fermented. Meals were balanced across textures and flavours, offering satisfaction without excess. Cooking was deeply ritualised. Meals followed rules of purity and timing. Certain foods were eaten at certain times of day. Hands were washed. Pots were cleaned meticulously. Eating was not casual. It was a controlled act tied to health and spirituality. Ancient Indian kitchens also understood the body. Food was classified according to its effects: heating or cooling, heavy or light. Cooking was preventative medicine, meant to keep the body in equilibrium rather than react to illness. In India, cooking was not just about feeding the body. It was about aligning the body with environment, belief, and balance. Every spice, every method, served a purpose far beyond taste, sustaining life in both physical and spiritual form. Across the ancient world, kitchens looked radically different, yet they solved the same problem in remarkably clever ways. Whether built from stone, clay, or earth, the hearth was always the heart of daily life. Cooking was not a background task. It was constant labour, repeated every day, shaping bodies, schedules, and societies. Ancient cooking reveals how deeply humans adapted to their environments. In river valleys, stews stretched grains and meat. In dry climates, spices preserved food and aided digestion. In forests and plains, roasting and smoking protected against spoilage. Every technique emerged from necessity, not comfort. Technology played a quiet but decisive role. Clay pots allowed simmering. Flat stones became griddles. Fermentation turned perishable ingredients into stable staples. None of these required advanced tools, only observation, patience, and repetition. Innovation did not always look like progress. Often, it looked like refinement. Cooking also exposed inequality. Elites ate variety and spectacle. Common people ate what sustained them. Street food fed cities. Temple kitchens fed gods. The same fire cooked both survival meals and luxury banquets, depending on who controlled the ingredients. Gender and labour were inseparable from the kitchen. In many cultures, women bore the daily burden of preparation, grinding grain, tending fires, carrying water, cleaning pots. Cooking demanded time, strength, and endurance. Meals were not effortless. They were earned. Food carried meaning beyond nutrition. Offerings honoured deities. Certain foods marked festivals, status, or purity. What you ate, and how, reflected identity. Cooking defined belonging as much as language or dress. Despite the hardship, ancient cooking was efficient. Nothing was wasted. Bones became broth. Ash became fertilizer. Leftovers became tomorrow's meal. Modern abundance often hides this wisdom, but ancient kitchens ran on precision and restraint. Perhaps most striking is how familiar these meals still feel. Bread, stews, sauces, flatbreads, fermented foods. These are not relics. They are foundations still present today. Modern kitchens owe more to ancient ones than we often realize. Cooking in the ancient world was slow, smoky, and demanding. But it was also intelligent, adaptable, and deeply human. Every meal represented centuries of accumulated knowledge passed hand to hand. Long before written science or modern technology, ancient cooks solved the most important problem of all: how to turn nature into nourishment day after day with whatever tools were available. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 during a violent lightning storm in a small village of the Austrian Empire. According to family legend, thunder cracked the sky at the exact moment of his birth, prompting a midwife to declare the child a child of darkness. His mother answered calmly, "No, a child of light." It was a poetic exaggeration, but one that would follow Tesla for the rest of his life. From an early age, Tesla's mind behaved differently. He did not imagine ideas vaguely, he saw them fully formed. As a child, he suffered from powerful visual hallucinations, sudden flashes of light accompanied by images so real they blended with the physical world. These episodes were frightening, but they also trained his mind to operate internally. To cope, Tesla learned to visualize objects deliberately, rotating them in his head, testing them mentally, correcting flaws before anything was ever built. This ability would later become his greatest strength. Tesla grew up surrounded by language, discipline, and expectation. His father, a Serbian Orthodox priest, wanted him to become a man of letters, not machines. His mother, though illiterate, was a gifted inventor in her own right, crafting household tools and mechanical aids from nothing but intuition. Tesla later credited her with giving him his inventive spark, even if she never wrote a word. As a boy, Tesla was obsessive. He memorized entire books, performed mental calculations for entertainment, and developed a compulsive relationship with patterns and repetition. He was physically frail, but mentally relentless. Sleep came in short bursts. His thoughts never stopped moving. Illness nearly ended his life during his teenage years. Bedridden with cholera, Tesla hovered near death for months. In a desperate moment, his father promised that if Tesla survived, he would allow him to study engineering. Tesla recovered and never forgot the bargain. From that point on, his life narrowed toward one goal: mastery of electricity. Even as a student, Tesla struggled with authority. He worked obsessively, then rebelled. He dazzled professors, then disappointed them. His brilliance was undeniable, but so was his difficulty fitting into normal systems. By the time Tesla left home, he was already living partly in the future, designing machines in his head that the world did not yet have the tools, patience, or imagination to understand. When Nikola Tesla left his childhood home to pursue engineering, he did not enter education as a student seeking guidance. He entered it as a man convinced his mind already worked faster than the system built to contain it. This tension would define his early adult life. Tesla studied engineering in Graz, where his brilliance immediately stood out. He could perform complex calculations in his head, recite textbooks from memory, and visualize machines with photographic clarity. Professors praised him, at first, but Tesla did not merely study electricity. He obsessed over it. He worked from early morning until late night, sleeping only a few hours, pushing himself with a discipline that bordered on self-destruction. It was during these years that Tesla became fixated on alternating current. Direct current, the dominant system at the time, frustrated him. It wasted energy, required constant intervention, and felt inelegant. Tesla believed electricity should flow naturally, rhythmically, like breath. Alternating current, he was convinced, was the future, even when his instructors dismissed the idea as impractical or dangerous. Conflict followed. Tesla openly challenged professors, correcting them publicly, and refusing to abandon ideas he believed were right. What began as admiration turned into concern. His workload became erratic. Periods of extreme productivity were followed by collapse. Gambling crept in, first as distraction, then as compulsion. He lost his scholarship. His academic path fractured. Tesla never completed his degree. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. Proof that talent without discipline leads nowhere. But Tesla was not finished. He drifted across Europe, working briefly as an engineer, repairing equipment, studying machinery, and refining his ideas internally. He was poor, often hungry, but mentally alive. Then came the moment that crystallized everything. While walking with a friend in a park, reciting poetry, Tesla suddenly stopped. In a flash of insight, he saw the rotating magnetic field, the key to making alternating current motors work efficiently. He drew diagrams in the dirt with a stick, explaining a system that did not yet exist in physical form, but was complete in his mind. This was how Tesla worked. He did not tinker blindly. He waited for clarity, then acted with certainty, but certainty did not pay rent. Europe had no room for a man who challenged authority, rejected convention, and refused compromise. Tesla realized that if his ideas were to survive, he would need a different stage. That stage lay across the ocean, in a country powered by ambition, speed, and electrical wires still waiting to be built. When Nikola Tesla arrived in New York City in 1884, he carried little more than a letter of introduction, a few poems, and an unwavering belief in his ideas. The city itself was already buzzing with electricity, but not the kind Tesla believed in. America was wired for direct current, and its most powerful advocate was Thomas Edison. Tesla initially worked for Edison, repairing generators and solving technical problems others could not. He impressed his superiors quickly. When machines failed, Tesla fixed them. When designs stalled, he improved them. His mind moved effortlessly through complexity. But admiration did not equal respect. Edison believed in trial and error, in brute force experimentation. Tesla believed in precision, theory, and mental design. The two men could not have been more different. Edison famously distrusted alternating current, dismissing it as dangerous and impractical. Tesla saw direct current as inefficient and limiting. What began as professional disagreement soon became ideological war. Tesla claimed Edison promised him a substantial bonus for improving his machines, a promise Edison later laughed off as a joke. Whether miscommunication or deception, the result was the same. Tesla quit, humiliated and broke. What followed was brutal. Tesla dug ditches to survive. The man who envisioned the future of electricity now laboured with a shovel, earning daily wages to bury cables he believed were obsolete. Yet even in the dirt, Tesla did not abandon his ideas. He waited. His opportunity came when investors recognized the potential of his alternating current system. Tesla finally gained the resources to build and demonstrate his motor. When it worked flawlessly. Smooth, efficient, and scalable, it proved everything Tesla had claimed. This ignited the so-called War of the Currents. Edison launched a public fear campaign, electrocuting animals to portray alternating current as deadly. Tesla responded not with theatrics, but with demonstrations of control. He allowed electricity to pass through his own body, lighting lamps without wires, showing the public that alternating current could be harnessed safely. The battle was not just technical. It was about power, reputation, and who would shape the modern world. Edison had money, factories, and influence. Tesla had vision. Ultimately, practicality decided the war. Alternating current could travel long distances with minimal loss. Direct current could not. Power stations adopted Tesla's system. Cities grew brighter. Industry accelerated. Tesla had won, but victory came at a cost. He gained recognition, but not stability. And the world had only just begun to glimpse the depth of his ambition. Victory in the War of the Currents transformed Nikola Tesla into a scientific celebrity almost overnight. His alternating current system powered cities, factories, and streetlights, and his name began appearing in newspapers alongside words like genius and visionary. At public lectures, Tesla dazzled audiences with controlled lighting, glowing tubes, and machines that seemed pulled from the future. Electricity, once invisible and frightening, became something theatrical, and Tesla was its magician. For a brief moment, everything aligned. Tesla partnered with powerful backers, including industrialists who understood the value of his inventions. Royalties flowed in. He lived comfortably, dressed impeccably, and moved through elite social circles with ease. Hotels became his homes. Journalists sought his opinions not just on electricity, but on the future of humanity itself. Yet beneath the surface, instability was already forming. Tesla was not a businessman. He disliked contracts, avoided negotiations, and trusted too easily. When financial pressure mounted on his partners, Tesla voluntarily gave up lucrative patent royalties that would have made him one of the wealthiest men of his era. He believed ideas mattered more than money, and assumed recognition would always follow usefulness. It did not. As his fame grew, so did his eccentricities. Tesla became increasingly ritualistic. He avoided physical contact, developed strict routines, and showed signs of obsessive behavior. He worked alone, sleeping little, eating selectively, and withdrawing from personal relationships. Invitations increased, but intimacy vanished. His ambitions also expanded beyond practicality. Tesla was no longer content with improving power systems. He wanted to revolutionize communication, transportation, and energy itself. He spoke openly about transmitting electricity wirelessly across the planet, an idea that fascinated the public but frightened investors. To financiers, Tesla was becoming unpredictable. While others built businesses around electricity, Tesla chased visions. He spent freely on experiments, convinced that success was always just one breakthrough away. Money flowed out faster than it came in. Projects stalled. Deadlines slipped. Still, Tesla remained confident. He believed the world would eventually catch up to his ideas. What he underestimated was time and patience. By the end of this period, Tesla was still famous, still admired, but increasingly isolated. The foundation of his success rested on fragile assumptions, that genius would be rewarded automatically, and that the future would wait for him. It would not. The stage was set for Tesla's most ambitious project, and the beginning of his greatest downfall. At the turn of the new century, Nikola Tesla became consumed by a single idea, a world connected without wires. Not just messages, but power itself, transmitted through the air, freely, endlessly, and available to all. To Tesla, this was not fantasy. It was the logical next step in human progress. He envisioned a planet wrapped in invisible energy, where information and electricity flowed as naturally as sound. Ships would navigate by wireless signals. News would travel instantly. Cities would glow without cables. In Tesla's mind, the future was already built. It simply needed funding. That funding arrived in the form of wealthy investors intrigued by wireless communication. With their support, Tesla began constructing a massive structure on Long Island, the Wardenclyffe Tower. Rising like a metal skeleton against the sky, it was meant to be the centerpiece of a global energy network. Underground shafts extended deep into the earth. Coils and generators filled nearby buildings. Everything about the project was oversized, experimental, and expensive. At first, confidence was high. Wireless radio transmission was beginning to show promise, and Tesla believed power would follow. But the project quickly ran into trouble. Costs ballooned, results lagged. Investors grew uneasy. The core problem was not technical alone, it was philosophical. Tesla wanted to give energy away, his backers wanted profit. When they realized Tesla's system could not easily be monetized or controlled, enthusiasm turned to suspicion. Funding slowed, then stopped. Meanwhile, competitors achieved practical success. Others transmitted radio signals using simpler, cheaper methods. They published results. They built businesses. Tesla dismissed them as short-sighted imitators, insisting his system was superior. Technically, he may have been right. Commercially, he was irrelevant. Construction halted. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to ambition without support. Tesla refused to abandon it, but without money, he could not continue. Creditors closed in. Equipment was sold. The dream collapsed quietly, without ceremony. For Tesla, the loss was devastating. Wardenclyffe was not just a project, it was proof of his worldview. Its failure marked a turning point. Investors stopped returning his calls. Newspapers lost interest. Invitations dried up. Yet Tesla did not retreat. He simply turned inward. If the world would not fund his visions, he would continue imagining them alone. The tower was eventually dismantled, its materials sold for scrap. What remained was an empty field, and a question that still lingers today. Was Tesla too early, or too idealistic, for the world he was trying to power? After the collapse of Wardenclyffe, Nikola Tesla did not reinvent himself. He retreated. The public figure who once filled lecture halls slowly vanished into hotel rooms, notebooks, and routines that grew stranger with time. Tesla was still thinking, constantly, but the world was no longer listening. Without investors, his work became increasingly theoretical. He announced inventions that were never fully demonstrated. Death rays, earthquake machines, energy weapons capable of ending war. Newspapers loved the headlines, but stopped taking the claims seriously. To many, Tesla shifted from visionary to curiosity, a brilliant mind drifting untethered from reality. His personal habits hardened into rituals. Tesla developed an extreme aversion to germs, washing compulsively and refusing to touch objects handled by others. He demanded precise numbers, especially multiples of 3, in daily activities. He avoided physical relationships entirely, believing celibacy preserved mental clarity. Whatever focus these rules once gave him now isolated him further. Financially, things worsened. Tesla moved between hotels, charming managers into extending credit based on his reputation. He paid when he could, promised future earnings when he could not. Former partners distanced themselves. New investors never appeared. The world had moved on to mass production, corporate laboratories, and teamwork. Tesla remained fiercely alone. Yet his mind never stopped working. He filled notebooks with diagrams, equations, and predictions. Some were wildly impractical, others were eerily accurate. He spoke of wireless communication devices small enough to fit in the hand. He imagined global information networks. He described remote-controlled machines decades before they became reality. These ideas passed mostly unnoticed, buried beneath his growing eccentric image. Tesla's loneliness deepened, but so did his attachment to ideas over people. He formed emotional bonds not with colleagues, but with animals, especially pigeons. He cared for injured birds, fed them daily, and spoke of one pigeon with particular affection, claiming it meant more to him than any human relationship ever had. To the outside world, Tesla appeared tragic, even pitiful. Once celebrated, now ignored. Once wealthy, now dependent. But this surface view misses something crucial. Tesla never believed success was measured by comfort or recognition. He believed ideas mattered more than their acceptance. Even as his reputation faded, the systems he helped create continued to expand. Cities grew brighter, industries grew louder, alternating current spread everywhere. Tesla may have been disappearing from public life, but the world around him was still running on his mind. In his final decades, Nikola Tesla lived in a strange contradiction. His name was still famous, yet his presence had become ghost-like. He was invited to birthdays, anniversaries, and interviews, not because people funded his work, but because he symbolized a fading age of lone inventors. Tesla had become a monument while still alive. He spent his days moving between New York hotels, most notably the Hotel New Yorker, living in increasingly modest rooms. His income came from small stipends, occasional lecture fees, and the quiet support of admirers who felt the world owed him something. In truth, it did. But debts of recognition are rarely paid on time. Tesla continued to announce inventions, often during birthday interviews with journalists. He spoke of directed energy weapons, advanced propulsion, and new forms of communication. Some listeners dismissed these claims as fantasies of an aging mind. Others sensed fragments of ideas that technology had not yet caught up to. Tesla no longer bothered to prove anything physically. His confidence rested entirely in thought. His routines grew stricter. He walked the same routes, ate the same meals, and followed numerical patterns with unwavering discipline. Any disruption unsettled him. These habits, once tools for focus, now served as walls between him and the world. Visitors described him as polite, articulate, and distant, always speaking from a place slightly removed from the present. Yet moments of clarity still pierced the isolation. Tesla was fully aware that others were being credited for inventions he had imagined decades earlier. He watched radio, remote control, and electrical infrastructure evolve into exactly what he had predicted. There was no bitterness in this realization, only quiet acceptance. Tesla believed truth did not need applause to exist. As his health declined, his body weakened, but his mind remained sharp. He wrote, calculated, and refined ideas until the end. In January of 1943, Tesla died alone in his hotel room. There was no crowd, no laboratory, no dramatic final experiment, just silence. Within days, government officials seized his papers, fearing what they might contain. Myths exploded instantly. Had Tesla built secret weapons? Had he discovered forces too powerful to reveal? The reality was likely simpler and more profound. His notebooks were filled with ideas ahead of their time, many unfinished, some impractical, others waiting for a future capable of understanding them. Tesla left the world quietly, but the systems he shaped ensured the world would never be quiet again. Death did what life never fully managed to do for Nikola Tesla. It separated the man from the noise surrounding him. Once the headlines faded and the eccentricities were stripped away, what remained was the architecture of the modern world, quietly humming with his ideas. Alternating current became universal. Power plants, transformers, transmission lines, all followed principles Tesla had defended when few believed him. Cities expanded vertically and horizontally because electricity could travel long distances efficiently. Factories ran non-stop. Homes lit up after sunset. None of this would have been possible without Tesla's core insight. Electricity had to move like a system, not a trick. Technologies Tesla imagined began to emerge one by one. Wireless communication reshaped the planet. Remote control became standard. Radio waves filled the air. Engineers rediscovered ideas Tesla had sketched decades earlier, now feasible with modern materials and computing. In many cases, his work was not copied. It was rediscovered. Public perception slowly shifted. Tesla transformed from forgotten oddity into misunderstood pioneer. Books reframed his story. Scientists cited his papers. Inventors invoked his name as a symbol of creativity, unbound by convention. He became a cultural icon, not because he sought fame, but because his story warned of what happens when vision outpaces institutions. Unlike his rivals, Tesla never built an empire. He built foundations. Others profited from systems he made possible. This imbalance, once tragic, became part of his legend. Tesla represented the idea that progress does not always reward its architects, but it still depends on them. His name began appearing everywhere, in laboratories, on monuments, in textbooks. The unit of magnetic flux density was named the Tesla, embedding him permanently into the language of physics. His life, once defined by isolation, became a reference point for future generations. Tesla's legacy is not a single invention. It is a way of thinking, visualizing systems before building them, trusting theory when evidence lags behind, believing that energy, information, and knowledge should move freely. The irony is sharp. Tesla dreamed of a world powered without wires, yet his greatest triumph lies in the wires themselves, carrying alternating current across continents, powering lives he never met, in cities he never saw. He died believing the world had passed him by. In truth, the world was still catching up. The life of Nikola Tesla forces an uncomfortable question. What does society do with people who see too far ahead? Tesla was not destroyed by failure of intelligence or effort. He was undone by a mismatch between vision and the systems meant to support it. Tesla believed ideas should serve humanity before profit. That belief shaped every major decision he made and cost him dearly. While others patented aggressively, built corporations and protected revenue streams, Tesla loosened his grip. He gave away rights, ignored contracts, and trusted that usefulness would eventually translate into support. History shows it rarely does. His story reveals a harsh truth. Progress is often built by people who are not rewarded by it. The world prefers refinements over revolutions, predictable returns over uncertain leaps. Tesla offered leaps. Investors wanted ladders. Yet it would be wrong to frame his life as tragedy alone. Tesla lived exactly as he chose. He rejected compromise, routine, and convention, not because he failed to understand them, but because he refused to submit to them. He traded comfort for clarity, stability for possibility, applause for conviction. Tesla also reminds us that innovation does not move in straight lines. Ideas can arrive decades before tools exist to support them. Being right too early can look exactly like being wrong. Tesla's wireless dreams, dismissed in his lifetime, are still unfolding today, not in the form he imagined, but in spirit. His loneliness, often emphasized, was not simply imposed by the world. It was partly chosen. Tesla prioritized ideas over relationships, systems over society, the future over the present. This choice gave him extraordinary focus and extraordinary isolation. Modern culture often romanticizes Tesla as a misunderstood martyr or secret genius. The reality is more complex. He was brilliant, difficult, generous, rigid, visionary, and flawed. He was human. What endures is not the myth, but the infrastructure. Every time a city lights up at night, every time electricity travels hundreds of miles without collapsing, Tesla's thinking is at work. His success did not come with applause or wealth. It came with permanence. Tesla's life teaches that the future does not always reward its architects, but it cannot exist without them. Some minds are not meant to fit their time. They are meant to bend it. And sometimes the measure of a life is not how comfortably it is lived, but how long its ideas last. Long before maps were objects you could fold or hang on a wall, they were ways of thinking. Ancient humans did not begin mapping out of curiosity alone. They did it because getting lost could mean death. A map was not about accuracy in the modern sense. It was about memory, survival, and meaning. The earliest maps were mental before they were physical. People memorized landmarks, stars, coastlines, seasonal changes, and paths worn into the land by repeated movement. Knowledge was stored in stories, songs, and rituals. Turn where the river bends. Stop before the red hill. Travel when this star rises. Space was learned through repetition, not measurement. When humans finally began drawing the world, they did not try to copy it, they tried to explain it. Early maps emphasized what mattered most. Water sources were exaggerated, dangerous zones were highlighted, sacred places were centered. Distance was often irrelevant. Importance was everything. This is why ancient maps can look strange to modern eyes. Rivers run in impossible directions. Cities appear larger than mountains. The sky and earth overlap. These were not mistakes. They were priorities. A map was a tool, not a mirror. Mapping was also an act of control. To name a place was to claim it. To draw a boundary was to assert authority. Kings mapped territory to tax it. Priests mapped the heavens to interpret fate. Travelers mapped routes to return home. Every map carried power and bias. Crucially, ancient people did not separate space from time. A place was different depending on season, weather, or ritual calendar. A road that existed in summer vanished in winter. A river, crossing safe one month, became deadly the next. Maps were dynamic, even when carved in stone or clay. The heavens were mapped alongside the earth. Stars were roads. Constellations were calendars. The sky told people when to plant, travel, fight, or pray. To map the world was also to map time itself. Unlike modern maps, ancient ones were rarely meant for strangers. They assumed shared knowledge. You were expected to already understand the land. The map simply reminded you of relationships between places, people, gods, and cycles. At its core, mapping was an act of imagination grounded in experience. It asked one essential question: what parts of the world matter enough to remember? Before grids, before north arrows, before scale, maps were stories told visually. They did not aim to show the world as it was everywhere. They aimed to show it as it mattered to those who lived within it. The earliest surviving physical maps come from Mesopotamia, and they tell us something important right away. Mapping began in cities, not wilderness. When humans settled permanently, space became something to organize, divide, tax, and defend. The map was born alongside bureaucracy. Mesopotamian maps were not drawn on paper. They were pressed into clay tablets, using the same cuneiform script used for laws, accounts, and prayers. This already tells us how maps were understood. They were records, official objects, part of administration, not art. Most Mesopotamian maps were small-scale and highly selective. They showed irrigation canals, field boundaries, city districts, and property lines. These were practical documents meant to resolve disputes, allocate land, and manage resources in a landscape shaped by rivers that flooded unpredictably. When the land shifted, the map mattered. But Mesopotamia also produced something far more ambitious: maps of the entire world as they understood it. The most famous example is a Babylonian world map, often called the Imago Mundi. On it, the city of Babylon sits firmly at the center. Surrounding it is a circular river, representing the known world, enclosed by a cosmic ocean. Beyond that lie triangular regions labelled as distant, dangerous, or unknown. This was not ignorance, it was world view. To the Babylonians, the world was ordered around cultural and cosmic importance, not physical distance. Babylon was central because it was central to meaning, power, and divine favour. The map reflected hierarchy, not exploration. Text and image worked together. Written labels explained what drawings alone could not. Mountains were not drawn realistically. They were symbols. Rivers were straightened. Scale was irrelevant. What mattered was relationship. This city controls this canal. This land belongs to this god. This border marks authority. Mesopotamian maps also blurred geography and mythology. The edge of the world was not just far away. It was where monsters lived, where the normal order broke down. Mapping the unknown meant acknowledging danger, not erasing it. Importantly, these maps were not meant for travellers. They were meant for officials, priests, and rulers. Navigation still relied on experience and oral knowledge. The map's role was conceptual. It defined how the world was structured, not how to walk through it. In Mesopotamia, mapping was an extension of governance and belief. To draw the world in clay was to say, this is how reality is arranged, and this is where you stand within it. In ancient Egypt, maps were born from repetition. The land itself forced precision. Every year, the Nile flooded, erased boundaries, and then retreated, leaving behind fertile soil and confusion. Fields vanished. Property lines dissolved. To govern, Egyptians had to redraw the world again and again. This is why Egyptian mapping focused less on exploration and more on measurement. Surveyors, often working for the state or temples, re-established borders after each flood. Using ropes, sight lines, and geometry, they recreated order from chaos. Mapping was an act of restoration, a way to return the land to its proper balance. Egyptian maps were often drawn on papyrus or carved into stone walls. They showed estates, canals, quarries and roads, not in perspective, but in plan. Objects were flattened and symbolized. A temple was not shown as it looked, but as it functioned. A canal was a line of control, not a scenic feature. Orientation mattered. South was often placed at the top of the map, reflecting the upstream direction of the Nile. North, associated with chaos and foreign lands, fell below. This alone tells us that Egyptian maps were moral documents as much as spatial ones. Direction carried meaning. The Nile itself dominated Egyptian spatial thinking. It was the spine of the country, the axis around which everything else was organized. East and West were defined relative to it. Life, work, and agriculture belonged to the East, where the sun rose. Death and the afterlife lay to the West, where the sun set. Maps reflected this cosmic division clearly and deliberately. Egyptians also mapped beyond the earth. Tomb walls and papyri included detailed maps of the afterlife. Routes the soul would travel after death. These were not symbolic suggestions. They were guides. They showed gates, obstacles, guardians, and paths that had to be followed correctly to reach eternity. To be lost in the afterlife was as dangerous as being lost in the desert. Astronomy fed directly into geography. Star maps aligned temples. Celestial cycles regulated time, labour, and ritual. The sky was treated as a second landscape, ordered and navigable, just like the land below. In Egypt, mapping was not about discovering new worlds. It was about maintaining balance in a world already known. To draw the land was to reaffirm cosmic order, a statement that chaos had been pushed back, at least for another year. In ancient Greece, mapping took a sharp turn toward abstraction and theory. Unlike earlier cultures that mapped to manage land or affirm cosmic order, Greek thinkers asked a more unsettling question. What does the world actually look like? Greek maps were born in the company of philosophy. Thinkers debated not just where things were, but why they were there, and whether the earth itself had a shape that could be understood through reason alone. This was a radical shift. Space was no longer only experienced or inherited, it could be calculated. Early Greek maps were still rough, often placing the Mediterranean at the centre and stretching unknown regions into vague edges. But the mindset behind them was new. Distance mattered. Direction mattered. Proportion mattered. A map was no longer just symbolic. It was an argument. One of the most important breakthroughs came from the idea that the Earth was spherical. This was not universally accepted at first, but it reshaped everything. If the world was round, then space could be measured systematically. Latitude and longitude were no longer fantasies. They were necessities. Greek scholars began combining travel reports, astronomical observation, and mathematics. By tracking the angle of the sun in different cities, they estimated distances across the globe. Coastlines were sketched based on sailors' accounts. Winds were classified. Climate zones were theorized. Mapping the world also meant mapping humanity's place within it. Greeks divided the earth into regions based on temperature and habitability. Some areas were thought too hot or too cold for civilization. These assumptions shaped how Greeks viewed foreign peoples, not as equals living elsewhere, but as products of their environment. Importantly, Greek maps were rarely used for navigation. Sailors still relied on experience, stars, and memory. The Greek map was primarily intellectual. It existed to explain the world, not to traverse it. This is why Greek maps often feel incomplete. Entire continents are missing or distorted, but within these limitations lies their achievement. They treated the world as something that could be known without seeing every part of it. Reason could fill gaps where experience failed. Greek mapping laid the foundation for later traditions. It introduced scale, projection, and the idea that geography could be a science rather than a collection of local truths. For the first time, a map was not just a guide through space. It was a theory about reality itself. Drawn with lines, angles, and confidence, that the universe followed rules humans could understand. If Greek maps were theories, Roman maps were tools. In the Roman Empire, mapping was stripped of philosophy and rebuilt for control. Rome did not need to know what the world looked like from above. It needed to know how fast an army could march through it. Roman mapping focused on movement, not shape. Roads mattered more than coastlines. Distances mattered more than proportions. A Roman map was less a picture of space and more a schedule laid flat. The most famous example is the Tabula Peutingeriana, a long, narrow road map showing the empire stretched horizontally like a ribbon. Cities appear as dots. Roads run in straight lines. Seas are compressed. Mountains barely exist. To modernize, it looks absurd. To a Roman official, it was perfect. This map answered practical questions. How far is it from Rome to Alexandria? Where are the stopping points? How many days of travel? Where can horses be changed? Where are inns, garrisons, and supply depots? Geography became logistics. Roman surveyors were highly skilled. Using tools like the groma and chorobates, they laid out roads with astonishing precision, often in straight lines that still define modern landscapes. These measurements fed into maps used by administrators, tax collectors, and military planners. Mapping was inseparable from governance. Unlike earlier cultures, Rome mapped aggressively outward. Conquest demanded documentation. Provinces were recorded, borders marked, resources noted. A place that was not mapped was not fully Roman. To draw a road through land was to claim it permanently. Roman maps also reinforced hierarchy. Rome itself was the fixed reference point. Distances were measured from the capital. All roads, literally and symbolically, led there. The map did not show the empire as equal regions. It showed a system radiating from power. Interestingly, Romans showed little interest in mapping the unknown. Beyond the borders lay barbarians, chaos, and irrelevance. The map ended where control ended. Unlike Greek curiosity or Mesopotamian cosmology, Roman mapping was confident enough to ignore what it could not dominate. For travellers, these maps were rarely carried physically. Knowledge was transmitted orally, or through written itineraries listing towns and distances. The map existed behind the scenes, shaping infrastructure rather than guiding individuals. Roman mapping turned space into an extension of authority. Roads became veins, cities became nodes, distance became predictable. Through maps, Rome did not just move through the world, it organized it, standardized it, and held it together with ink, stone, and discipline. Across the vast Pacific, in cultures with no writing system and no paper maps, navigation reached a level of sophistication that still astonishes modern sailors. In the islands of Polynesia, mapping was not something you looked at. It was something you learned, memorized, and felt. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean long before compasses or sextants. They did not rely on written charts aboard their canoes. Instead, they carried maps in their minds, built from stars, waves, winds, birds, and memory. The ocean itself was the map. What outsiders later called stick charts were teaching tools, not travel guides. Made from thin sticks tied together with fibre, these charts represented wave patterns, island positions, and ocean swells. Curved sticks showed how waves bent and reflected around land masses. Shells or knots marked islands. But these objects were never taken to sea. They were studied on land, then left behind. To a Polynesian navigator, the ocean was structured. Swells moved in predictable rhythms. Different wave systems intersected and created recognizable patterns. Islands disrupted these patterns in subtle ways that could be sensed through the motion of the canoe. Navigation was tactile. You felt where you were. Stars were equally important. The night sky was divided into paths, with specific stars rising and setting in known directions. A journey was planned as a sequence of star bearings, adjusted as the night progressed. When clouds obscured the sky, navigators turned to wind direction, cloud shapes, seabirds, and even the colour of the water. This knowledge was sacred and restricted. Navigation was taught through long apprenticeships, often within families. Mistakes were fatal. There was no margin for error in the open ocean. Mapping, therefore, was not abstract. It was embodied skill. Time and space were inseparable. A route was not just a direction, but a duration. You knew where you were by how long you had been travelling under certain conditions. Memory replaced measurement. Experience replaced instruments. European explorers initially dismissed Polynesian navigation as primitive luck. Only later did researchers realise how systematic it was. Polynesians were not guessing. They were reading a complex, dynamic map written into the natural world itself. These maps challenge modern assumptions. They show that accurate spatial understanding does not require paper, numbers, or scale. It requires attention, training, and deep integration with environment. In Polynesia, the map was not an object. It was a relationship between navigator and ocean, sky and canoe, past journeys and present motion. Space was not drawn. It was lived. While the Mediterranean world debated geometry and empire, ancient Asia developed mapping traditions shaped by administration, philosophy, and cosmic order. In both ancient China and ancient India, maps were less about exploration and more about harmony, aligning human space with moral and natural law. In China, mapping emerged from governance. As early states expanded, rulers needed to know where roads, rivers, farmlands, and borders lay. Maps were drawn on silk, bamboo, and wood, often accompanied by detailed written descriptions. Accuracy mattered, but not in isolation. A good map also reflected order. Rivers flowed properly. Mountains stood where they should. Space mirrored hierarchy. Chinese maps often used grid systems long before they appeared elsewhere. This allowed distances to be measured consistently and regions to be compared. But these grids were not neutral. The capital sat near the centre, reinforcing political gravity. Peripheral regions appeared smaller or less detailed, visually echoing their subordinate status. Crucially, Chinese mapping linked geography with cosmology. The landscape was shaped by qi, vital energy, flowing through mountains and waterways. Maps helped locate auspicious sites for cities, tombs, and temples. Choosing where to build was not just practical. It was ethical and cosmic. Mapping became a tool for maintaining balance between heaven, earth, and humanity. In ancient India, maps took a different form. Physical cartography existed, especially for land grants and administration, but much spatial understanding was preserved in texts. The world was described through layered regions, concentric continents, and sacred axes. Mount Meru stood at the centre of the cosmos, surrounded by oceans and lands, arranged symbolically. These were not navigational errors. They were metaphysical maps. Indian cosmology treated space as inseparable from moral and spiritual progress. Pilgrimage routes mattered more than political borders. Sacred rivers were mapped through verse and ritual memory, rather than ink. Astronomy again played a central role. Calendars, star paths, and planetary cycles shaped how space was understood. Time and geography merged. Knowing where you were also meant knowing when you were, within cycles of rebirth, duty, and ritual obligation. Unlike Roman or Greek traditions, Asian mapping did not seek to conquer space intellectually or militarily. It sought to situate humans correctly within it. Maps were guides for behaviour as much as for movement. These traditions remind us that mapping is never just technical. Every map reflects values. In China and India, the value was balance between ruler and land, human and cosmos, action and restraint. The world was not something to be mastered. It was something to be aligned with, and maps showed how. Not all ancient maps were meant to guide feet or ships. Some were meant to guide lives. Across many ancient cultures, mapping extended beyond land and sea into time, fate, and the heavens. These maps did not show where you were going. They showed when and why. Astronomical maps were among the most precise creations of the ancient world. Star charts tracked the movement of constellations, planets, and the sun across seasons. In Mesopotamia, priests mapped the sky to predict omens. In Egypt, stars aligned tombs and temples. In China, celestial maps mirrored imperial bureaucracy, with heavenly officials watching over earthly ones. Mapping the sky was a way to understand order itself. These maps were deeply practical. Agricultural calendars depended on them. When a star rose at dawn, it signaled planting or harvest. When a constellation disappeared, it warned of floods or drought. Time was not abstract. It was spatial, written across the sky. Sacred maps also guided souls. In Egypt, detailed maps of the underworld showed the soul's journey after death, gates, judges, dangers, and paths to eternity. These were not metaphors, they were instructions. To know the map was to survive the afterlife. In Mesoamerica, calendars functioned as maps of destiny. Days had directions, colours, gods, and meanings. Time moved through space cyclically, not linearly. To be born on a certain day placed you at a specific point in a cosmic map that shaped your fate. Space, time, and identity merged. Even cities were mapped symbolically. Many ancient capitals were laid out as cosmic diagrams. Streets aligned with solstices. Palaces marked the centre of the world. Temples represented mountains or stars. Living within the city meant living inside a map, one that constantly reinforced how the universe was ordered. These invisible maps were often more important than physical ones. A traveller could get lost and recover. A soul that lost its way did not. A farmer who ignored the calendar starved. A ruler who ruled out of alignment lost legitimacy. Modern maps separate space from meaning. Ancient maps rarely did. To map something was to explain its role in a larger system. The question was not, where is this? But, what does this belong to? By mapping heaven, time, and fate, ancient people turned uncertainty into structure. They could not control floods, death, or the stars, but they could place them on a map and give them order. In doing so, they transformed the unknown into something navigable, not with feet, but with belief, ritual, and memory. When viewed together, ancient maps reveal far more than coastlines or routes. They reveal how humans think when faced with uncertainty. Mapping was never just about space. It was about meaning, control, memory, and survival. Every ancient culture mapped what it valued most. Mesopotamians mapped canals and cities because water and administration kept them alive. Egyptians mapped the Nile and the afterlife because order and eternity defined their world. Greeks mapped abstract space because they trusted reason. Romans mapped roads because movement sustained empire. Polynesians mapped waves and stars because the ocean demanded it. No map is neutral. Each one is a confession. Ancient maps also show that humans do not experience space evenly. We exaggerate what matters and compress what does not. Sacred places grow large. Dangerous zones loom. The familiar becomes central. The unknown is pushed to the edge or filled with myth. This is not error. It is cognition. Modern maps aim for objectivity, but even today, choices remain. What gets named? What gets bordered? What is centered? Ancient maps make these choices visible. They do not hide perspective. They announce it. Mapping also reveals a deep human desire to turn experience into structure. To walk a path once is memory. To draw it is permanence. To teach it is culture. Maps allowed knowledge to survive individual lifetimes, to move across generations, to outlast those who first walked the land. Perhaps most importantly, ancient maps remind us that humans have always lived in multiple spaces at once. Physical landscapes, social hierarchies, sacred cosmologies, temporal cycles. A map could show one, or all, depending on what the culture needed. We often judge ancient maps by modern standards and find them inaccurate. But accuracy was never the point. Relevance was. A map that guided survival, ritual, or identity was successful, regardless of scale or projection. In this sense, ancient maps were deeply human. They blended observation with imagination, precision with belief. They acknowledged that the world is too complex to capture fully, so we choose what matters and draw that. Even today, when satellites can photograph every corner of the planet, we still map selectively. We still center ourselves. We still tell stories through space. Ancient maps remind us that mapping is not just about knowing where you are. It is about knowing who you are and how you believe the world is meant to be understood.